Hey boys and girls, Dave here for more of my reckless perspectives. Today we're going to talk about time travel. And because time travel would be awesome, right? You can go back in time, you can change things, make the world a better place, make bad things not happen. But can you do that? So time travel is shown in two different ways, generally in movies. Well, there's the way where you can't actually change anything. Like you go back in time and you do stuff, but everything you did really happened in the timeline that you went back in. The show Lost, for the most part, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, I'm pretty sure, Harry Potter, Prisoner of Azkaban, definitely, that's the way it worked. So we're not going to talk about that because, like if you knew that's the way it would happen, that's the way things work, then there'd really be no reason to go back because you knew that it didn't matter, right? But regardless, we're going to talk about when you can go back and change things. So let's say you go back in a time machine and you change things. Let's say you go back and you kill Hitler as a baby or something. Or just prevent him from becoming who he was. Get him into art school or something. Have his mother love him more. But what would happen? So first of all, if that was the reason for you to go back in time, then you're creating a new timeline where presumably there's no Holocaust, no World War II. Things are probably better. You never know, but probably better. And then you want to go back in time to fix it. So, but you won't want to go back in time to fix it the second time. So you won't make a time machine, or if you did, you wouldn't go back to the same place and do the same thing. So the thing is, did you go back in time? And obviously you did, or else you wouldn't have changed things. So the only way it makes sense is that there was the original timeline where you had a time machine, you went back, and there's a new timeline where there isn't. Question is, does the original timeline stop and vanish? In which case, going back in time, you're actually pretty much killing the entire population of the universe, blinking it out of existence, which seems kind of like drag. Or it goes on anyway, in which case you didn't really change anything. You just created an alternate version in which things are different. Either way, going back in time doesn't necessarily seem like it's really the way to solve problems. But regardless, that's the situation, and logically there's no way to really get around this. Back to the Future. Okay, great movie. Came out in 1985, takes place in 1985, at least the beginning of it. Marty McFly, high school kid, he's kind of cool. He's in a band, he's got a hot girlfriend, he's got this friend who's an old scientist, which, on a side note, is kind of cool, and it kind of sucks that you would never see that anymore because people would think that's weird. And why the fuck can an old guy be friends with a young guy? He helped Marty helped him with his experiments, and he let Marty use his electronic equipment. Why is that wrong? Anyway, I think society judges too much now, but that is for another video. Anyway, Doc Brown, the old doctor, he builds a time machine out of a DeLorean, which is a car, but he gets attacked by terrorists and shot and apparently killed, and then Marty drives the DeLorean and goes back in time to 1955. When he's in 1955, he interacts with his own father right before he's supposed to meet his own mother, and he prevents it from happening. But he's got to fix it. So he fixes it, but in the process of fixing it, he changes it such that his father gains courage and is no longer a wimp. So we saw before in 1985 that George's father, Marty's father, George McFly, is kind of a wimp. He's picked on by Biff, and his mother is this fat, depressing alcoholic. Not that there's anything wrong with being fat, but anyway, that was his parents, and then he changes this, and then so he goes forward back to 1985, and they're different. His father's cool. His mother's happy and energetic. His siblings, his brother and sister, are they have cool jobs. They have good jobs as opposed to having sucky jobs before. And Marty has a truck, which he didn't have a car before. Now he's got this cool pickup truck, which is kind of what we all wanted back in 1985, because that was what we considered cool. But anyway, so what actually happened? What's the scenario? Okay, 1985, 1955. This is the first time around. Marty 1 is born, because there's going to be more than one Marty. Pay attention. Marty 1 is born, 1969, 1985. George is a wimp, and Doc gets killed. Marty goes back to 1955. He interacts with his father and his mother and Doc Brown, 1955 Doc Brown, and then is able to go forward in time. He leaves a message, he leaves a letter, a secret letter to Doc Brown to warn him about the terrorists. So he goes back to 1985. First thing he does, he goes to the mall to try and stop the terrorists from killing Doc Brown. But what happens is Doc Brown is wearing a bulletproof vest, so he doesn't get killed because he read the letter. And then he sees Marty, someone who looks just like him, jump in a car and the DeLorean and go and then vanish, going back in time, presumably. So what does that mean? So Doc, so that's Doc. Hold on a second. So that Doc is Doc 2. So what happens is in 1905 you create an alternate timeline where other things happen. So you got Doc 2. And so Doc 2 lives. Doc 2 lives because he read the thing. So he's not the same Doc. Doc 1 still died. Marty didn't go back to this Doc. Marty didn't leave a letter for this Doc. This Doc is screwed either way. But this Doc lives. But then Marty, who did he see that jumped in the car and vanished? That was Marty 2. So Marty 2 was born in this timeline. And then Marty 2 went back to 1955. So what you got is you've got another timeline. So let's say you got timeline 3, and Marty 2 went back to 1955 and started another timeline, timeline 3. And what's he going to find? He's going to find, if he goes back to the exact same time that Marty 1 went by, he's going to create a third timeline, and it's going to have Marty 1 coming back to the original time, a copy of him, the original time, and then Marty 2. So you have two Martys. Marty 1 and, all right, let's keep our colors consistent. Marty 1 and Marty 2. So you're going to have two Martys there. And then they're not going to know what's going on, because all of these two Martys show up at the same place. So, and presumably they're not going to know that this happened before. So, unless, of course, Doc told this Marty. So this Doc, Doc 2, so Doc 1, like, he never met Marty before he was older, and after Marty 1 was born. Doc 2 met Marty in 1955, before Marty was born. Later, Marty's born. Later, they meet. They become friends. Presumably, almost everything the same happens, and he goes back in time. But if Doc knew that was going to happen, because at least he knew that Marty came back, maybe he would tell him about it. And maybe he would somehow, like, prevent him from going back to the same place, you would think, or at least tell him about it. But I mean, if he read the letter and he knew the terrorists were going to kill him, you would think he just might not go to the same place. I mean, because the bulletproof vest is, take a headshot or something. So, seemed kind of risky, but fun movie. Anyway, so you got two Martys here, and then there. So assuming that they can figure out how to go back to the future again, then they're going to go here. But this timeline, so you got Doc 3. But so in this timeline, so maybe you got George, this is George 2, George 1, George 2, you're going to have George 3. So what Marty 1 and Marty 2 do when they go back to the third timeline, do they interact with George and Lorraine? Do they interact with Marty's parents? So if they didn't interact with them at all, presumably what happened when George and Lorraine met in the original timeline would happen again, and then George would be a wimp again. So these two Martys would go back here to the same one, but also, like, there's going to be a Doc 3, right? This is Doc 3 here. And so Doc 3 is going to see, there's two Martys show up. And so when he gets older, he might not organize this so that a Marty, because let's say there was another Marty, let's say there was Marty 3. So Marty 3 is born here. And let's say if the Doc did the exact same thing again, and this Marty went back in time, then how many Martys are you going to have in timeline 4? You're going to have 3 Martys. But even if he does go back, you got 2 Martys here. One of them grew up with the wimp George, one of them grew up with the cool George, and then they're both there, and like who gets the stuff. I guess if George was a wimp again and they grew up normally, then this one would be exactly like Marty 3. But Marty 2 would, you know, like where would he live, and, you know, whose social security number would he use or whatever. But then there might be 3 of them there, but then he goes back and there's 3 there, and then if the doc sent a Marty back every time you're going to create a new timeline, and you're going to have like more and more Martys. And so eventually you'll have like 1,000 million Martys showing up at the guy's farm. And at some point, it gets hard to hide that many DeLorean time machines in 1955. But I suppose if there's enough of them, then they could just like take over. They could like build an army of Martys and just take over the whole, you know, world with Martys. I guess you could do that. You know, and at least he could force Huey Lewis to, you know, listen to his music. But so anyway, that's what would happen. A couple inconsistencies. So for example, so this is the problem with the scenario, the time travel scenario where you don't change things, but things just like it happened already. So there's a little bit of that in here. For example, Marty plays a song on the guitar when he plays in the band. He plays Johnny B. Good, a song by Chuck Berry. And then there's a band that was supposed to play there, and one of the guys is Marvin Berry, who apparently is Chuck Berry's brother, calls Chuck Berry on the phone and says, hey, listen to this. Listen for a new sound here. Listen to this. It's really cool. And he's playing Johnny B. Good. And so presumably Chuck Berry learned Johnny B. Good from Marty. So if that were the case, if Chuck Berry learned Johnny B. Good from Marty, and Marty learned Johnny B. Good from Chuck Berry, nobody wrote Johnny B. Good. Someone has to have invented it. If it's an idea, someone has to do it. So for example, also, let's say I'm an old man and I go back, presumably, let's imagine that I'm an old man and like a young guy that I actually am. I go back in time, let's say I have a watch, I have an old watch, and I find a little kid and I give him a watch, hey, young fella, here's this watch. Someone gave me this when I was a kid, and I'm giving this to you. And it turns out that little kid is little me, and then I get the watch. So I can look at the watch, you can say Timex on it, but who made it? Was it ever at a Timex like factory, or did it where did it come from? Or is it just exists in a circle? And if that's the case, then what if I scratch it? What if I drop it and it gets a scratch, and then the next time around I drop it again, and it gets a different scratch, or a same scratch gets deeper. I mean, the thing is, it's going to get older. It's going to end up being like infinitely old or something. But so there's a circle. It's basically what's the thing? I can't remember. The ribbon that never ends. Anyway, so there's problems with that way. But this way works. But one question is, does this timeline still exist? So if a lot of people think, oh, you're changing the past, so the current, you know, the previous history no longer exists. But so either it goes on, in which case you're not changing anything, or it blinks out of existence, in which you're killing everybody. If you're talking about numbers, it may be even considered worse than the Holocaust, killing just blinking the entire population of the universe out of existence. But that's an ethical question I will leave for you to work on. I think this is all I got for today for time travel. If you have followed me, then maybe I have successfully ruined time travel for you forever. You're welcome.